Okay, I'll call the meeting of Quesnel City Council to order. And I do recognize that we meet on the traditional territory of the LHTAKO DENE Nation. With respect to the agenda, council members, by way of an email, you should have a presentation, the BC Housing City of Quesnel presentation. Those slides will be spoken to by our presenters. They won't take the screen over and put them up. But Mel and Malachy, if you could keep in mind that council members, some of them may not be able to do split screen. So do feel comfortable to sort of speak to the main bullets that you've got in there. It's not like in previous situations where we would all necessarily have it in front of us. And then we have the actual documentation for the executive committee report and a correction of the record relative to the gold plan relocation. So those are all the additional items for the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Councillor Goulet, so moved. Seconder, Councillor Paul. Anyone opposed? Okay, so that has passed. And then adopting the special electronic council meeting minutes of June 16. Motion to adopt. Councillor Vic, Councillor Roodenburg. Any questions or comments? Anyone opposed? Okay, those have been adopted. And so Malachy, long time no see, my Irish friend. I hope you are well. And Melanie, nice to see you too. We'll turn the time over to you, and we have allotted the time needed for both the presentation and for the interaction as well. So please don't feel like you need to rush through your presentation. So I'm not sure who's going to lead. Is it Malachy, you're going to take the lead initially, or?
Yeah, I'll start, Bob.
Okay, super.
Okay, well, thank you, Mayor, and it's nice to be back in the saddle again. And moving forward, there were some health issues, but we're all good now and getting back at it. You know, coming back at a time, and well, I'll talk about it a bit in one of the slides coming up. So let's just start with that. So yes, so thanks and glad to be here and answer whatever questions you need to have answered to how we can move forward. It's going to be the introduction slide, housing agreement and good neighbor agreement, Bridges supportive housing, the Carson Avenue shelter, looking forward, and of course the questions and discussions. These were put forward mostly, I think, in what the city administration had brought forward on some of the questions and just some of the things that we want to look at today. So, you know, this is one of the things that we've been putting out quite a bit, and it's certainly thank you to the city and all our community housing and homeless service providers in all the communities. This COVID thing, of course, I come back right at COVID, which probably caused some of my illness, to be honest with you. It's been a heck of a time. It's been a heck of a time, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the, you know, we have 13 units secured in a hotel or motel in Quesnel to support individuals that are experiencing what might be COVID-like symptoms or COVID symptoms. We are keeping those intact we've extended that. It was supposed to end at the end of this month. We've extended it for another 3 months till the end of September. We don't know what's going to happen with COVID, but we want to make sure that we have the opportunity that if somebody is showing the symptoms of COVID, that the health authorities do have a place to put those individuals and isolate them. So yeah, so we've, you know, as we work with all our communities, we work together to keep those safe and help to protect not only the providers, but the tenants, vulnerable people, and the people in general in the community. Certainly, through this experience, we understand the importance of housing. Now, for one, it keeps people more separated, hence why we rented some of those units. Certainly, the actions we've taken have helped support vulnerable people and to slow the spread of the COVID-19 virus by creating more of that space by having those units. And of course, as we look towards opening the new supportive housing in Quesnel, not only the Bridges, but down the road, the Del Keth units on Front Street, we have a greater appreciation of the significance that housing has on health and community. And so I think that's positive, and it's moving in the right direction for us and for all of us. On the agreements, you know, I basically just put these two things up there. The housing agreement, of course, is the agreement between BC Housing and the City of Quesnel. I'm not sure if the councillors have a copy, but I'm sure they can get one. Administration would probably have one. What's the guiding principles of that are certainly on page 1. I'm not going to read this whole document. And certainly obligations of BC Housing within that document are on the 3rd page. The Good Neighbor Agreement is an agreement, of course, between the City of Quesnel, the Quesnel Shelter and Support Society, and other community stakeholders and residents. And the same kind of thing goes, it's listed right on the front. What's that trying to achieve? Really for the community to have a voice, make sure everything is run smoothly and that it's a successful project for the City of Quesnel. That includes the housing agreement. The Elliott Street Supportive Housing, we've been on this for a while now. 32 studio units, common dining room, commercial kitchen, many spaces and programming space. Supportive housing is a self-contained studio home with supports provided on site to ensure people can achieve and maintain housing stability. BC Housing Quesnel Shelter Support Society will lead the resident selection process in collaboration with local service providers. I'd like Mel to maybe talk a little bit more about that piece, because at that table also includes the health authority. And so Mel, would you like to just expand on that piece a bit, since you'll be doing that with our people here at BC Housing?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. First, I'd just like to thank the City of Quesnel for having us tonight as a delegation, and really happy to share this information with you. Yeah, so the tenant selection process, what we're doing with that is we're following, it's a provincial process that has been implemented in a number of communities in order to find the right tenants for supportive housing. So it's called the Community Access and Assessment Table. And essentially, the Community Access and Assessment is a table comprised of us as the nonprofit organization who will be running the facility, our healthcare partners, and in future, other homeless serving organizations. We held a meeting on April 15th with various community representatives and partners. We had 22 attendants on that Zoom call, which was a great success. I was able to go over some of the frequently asked questions. We talked about what that process would look like initially. And so initially how the initial tenanting happens in the facility is our society and BC Housing and the Northern Health Authority, our partners there, will sit down and look at the initial tenanting. So we will look at those 28 units and we will decide who goes into them. We've already got applications out to the community. They can be accessed on our website. We have links through our social media. Our staff here are busy collecting them. We've received applications from partners in the community. So we're getting a good number of them. Once those are all collected, the closing date for those is July, the end of July, and then we'll be looking at sitting down for the initial process at the beginning of August. So second week in August, we'll be looking at who will actually be tenants in the facility. And we'll be doing that initially with Northern Health, us, and BC Housing. Following that, if vacancies come up at the facility, then we will bring other partners to the table as part of that process. So other homeless serving organizations, could be the Salvation Army, it could be the Friendship Center, it could be a variety of service providers who were invited to that process.
One of the pieces to that, of course, is that having Northern Health at the table. So the individuals that you're placing there, it's what other kind of, like say, mental health supports, addiction supports, that they're at the table, and you're putting people in there and then arranging what level of support that they can get to keep them housed. It's also important that you have a good tenant mix in the building, because that creates a healthy community also.
Yeah. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that process if anyone has any.
Yeah, I think, okay, Councillor Goulet, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Melanie and Malachy, for having the dialogue and the open discussion tonight around this important topic for us here in the community. I just want to go back to what you were saying about offering services and working with other. Is there a written operating model for what that would look like? Is there something that's in writing that we can all follow and be able to partake in, especially when it comes to the operation and the clients, and how we're gonna refer services out and be able to enter into partnerships with different organizations? I'm just wondering if there's something written or an operating model that we can have a look at and view, so that we can be on the same page when it comes to the services that are being put within, and what services we need, or maybe there might be services that there might be a gap in that we didn't even think of moving forward.
Yeah, I'll see what we can get you on that. I think it'll really depend too on the level of service that different people need. We start off with doing a vulnerability assessment tool on each one of them, that I think it's about 12 vulnerabilities, identifies what their main vulnerabilities are right at this time. It might be homelessness, it might be mental health issues, it might be physical pieces to it, but we can get you some information on that.
Okay.
I'd just also like to add, Tony, if you want to go on to our website, there is some information on Bridges supportive housing and some of the programming that will be offered there. Of course, a lot of the programming and services that we'd like to see, a lot of that will be done in partnership and collaboration with other service providers in the community, in working with those tenants. So, but there will be, you know, life skills programming, food programming, and all of that is outlined on our website. So take a look and feel free to connect with me anytime if you have questions.
Council members, I think this is the time to be asking the questions about the Elliott Street or Bridges supportive housing complex that will open this fall. Because they will then move on to the disposition and the future of the shelter. So questions regarding the Bridges supportive housing facility? Councillor Vic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi, Melanie. I got a question pertaining to your April 15th meeting, your community access assessment meeting, where you had, I guess you said you had 22 attendants.
Yep.
So are you able to elaborate, like, who was there? Like, was it neighborhood members were in attendance, or?
No, for that process, that was our community partners that were in attendance. We had City of Quesnel there. We had various Northern Health employees. We had invites out to other service providers like the Friendship Center, Salvation Army, the Women's Resource Center. So it was mainly a service provider oriented information session.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
So the reason I asked that is, rightly or wrongly, there is still some apprehension in the community. Many councillors are approached often and just with apprehension, concern about, you know, how the operation will function, and that includes tenant selection. There's a whole gamut of concerns of which we're not always prepared to answer. So we were hoping, or at least I'm hoping, that at some point there's going to be an open dialogue with the community. And when I say the community, I'm really referring to the neighborhood, as they're going to be your neighbors, and they're going to want, they want to have some a dialogue with how your facility is going to be managed and what sort of things will happen there. So at what point will the neighborhood be involved in this dialogue?
Sure, thanks for that question, Mitch. So last April, we had our initial Good Neighbor meeting, and I think this is where the Good Neighborhood Agreement comes in and the Good Neighbor Committee. So we held, I mean, prior to breaking ground, we held that initial meeting. And now we have actually it's on our website. We put up a save the date today for a Good Neighbor meeting for July 22nd. And tomorrow I'll send out an email invite to everyone who attended that meeting last April, as well as we'll advertise it and put it out through our social media. It will be virtual again. And part of that meeting, you're welcome to look at that save the date. It's on our website. And I can send that out as well. It outlines a number of things that we'll go over, and that's part of that, the tenant selection process, and being able to talk to the community about what that looks like.
Tanya?
Thank you, Mel. In all due respect, the one thing I would like to see at that meeting, I would not like to see that meeting stacked with a bunch of employees from the shelter. It put community members in a very discomfort position. If we actually got a number of community members, they would feel like it would right away be a confrontation. I would like to see it being a more open meeting for discussion for that process to occur.
So yeah, at that last meeting, there were 6 employees and members, 6 employees combined with board members at that last meeting. And there was, I think we sent out 250 invitations to the community, and we rented a hall. So certainly there was no intention to stack, you know, people who were in support of it against people who weren't, but rather have people there who are able to answer questions should we have received 100 or 150 people at the Elks Hall. So, but I do hear your concern with that, and thanks, Tanya. Yeah.
Yep. And I think you did do some of this, or at least, I mean, I know your time is valuable, and I'm not sure it would be you because, you know, your time is valuable, but if you could have other people notifying the community members. I mean, notices, unfortunately, in the mail just are not probably sufficient. Maybe there's some poster boards around there or something. Maybe
Well, and I think council members have all indicated that they've been approached by individuals with questions and by individuals who live in the area who have questions. And so I think council, it's incumbent upon each of us to make sure individuals who have asked us questions about the Bridges supportive housing or process or whatever, get that notice of a meeting and the details as well. So they can participate directly and ask their questions directly as well. So.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'd just like to also point out that on our website are some frequently asked questions that we often encounter, and those are posted there as well. So that might help. It may be an area that you can suggest people look to.
Questions on the Bridges supportive housing? Councillor Roodenburg?
So this kind of ties, hi guys, this kind of ties in with the Carson Avenue piece, but also with the new building. You know, one of the statements you have here, Malachy, is that the society is meeting all of BC Housing's operating requirements. So that means that they're in compliance, but what does that mean? How is that shown? Is there a matrix that is out there that you go through? And how as public do we get to see or understand what it means to be in compliance? Because that's the other big issue out there, right? With community is around, well, I hear this is happening and I hear that is happening. So what does it mean when you say they're in compliance?
They're following the guidelines or the rules in the operating agreement that we have with them for the shelter operation. We do operational reviews on a 3-year basis, which covers the whole gambit, whether it be the maintenance, the conditions, the finances, those things within that operational review.
So is there public documentation that people can access to see this?
I don't know if I don't believe we make it public, but I'll take a look into that process for you.
And the reason why I ask is I've been involved with a couple of other things because of COVID. And one of the things I discovered was around daycares and how when they, you know, they have people who come in and check out what the daycare looks like, making sure that they're compliant. And there is a website that the community or public can go to that talks about each of these visits and whether they were in compliance, what it was or was not in compliance, when they came back into compliance. So that's kind of where I'm going with here is there that kind of an opportunity, or is that available for the public, or is it somewhere that just isn't, nobody ever bothers to pay attention to?
I think it's an important piece of information because it's how we keep track of them also. Not only that, we see them on a regular basis. There's annual budgets that are audited, all financial statements that we go over with each of our service providers. But I'll find out what the release piece is of that document.
I think that's a really important piece because, you know, it's easy to say you're in compliance, but if you don't know what that means, then you don't know what question to ask, right? You don't know what you don't know. So if you could figure out, or at least allow the public to understand what it is that you know, whatever your matrix is that you use to make sure that a society and their shelter facilities are in compliance. I think that's an important piece to it also.
Sure, it's a pretty lengthy document, and not only would the executive director have to be present, also a board member has to be present too.
Okay.
So, but I'll look into that for you and get back to you.
Councillor Vic.
Thank you. Hi. Sorry, I just regarding. I'm just going to go back to what we were talking about with community outreach, and in another hat I wear. I've helped with the construction of a seniors living apartment building, and early on, Malachy actually was a great asset and help to our society. And part of our outreach when we engage the community in the very beginning is knowing that when you send emails out or pamphlets or whatever, understanding that you're just not going to get the uptake for feedback. So basically on BC Housing's suggestion, we actually canvassed the neighborhood on foot, and we got honest feedback and actually unearthed some issues that we had to deal with before that project could move forward. So Melanie, I don't know, I'm not trying to tell you how to reach the community, but that advice we received from BC Housing and the canvassing was essential for us to get honest feedback to make sure we were acting in good faith with our neighbors, and it helped us build a better project. And I think that's all what we want here is we just want the best possible project we can have there. And in the early days, it's important to get that honest feedback from your neighbors, and canvassing was the single best way we got that feedback. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and if it's possible to adjust the way you reach your neighbors, that is the best way.
Yeah, and for reference, DeKalb did the exact same thing for their project too.
And just to add on to that, we also visited a supportive housing society at the early days in Prince George, who also indicated to us that's what they did, and I believe we shared that was what we would prefer to be done.
Any other questions from council before we move on to the shelter? Okay, so Malachy, a couple of things from me and Mel. And I do want to state publicly that we have long appreciated our relationship with BC Housing. And so Malachy, you know, with you back there, because there was that bit of a hiatus in terms of the leadership. Dominic came up and stepped in and so on. But we're looking forward to the DeKalb project proceeding, and we're looking forward to you cutting more checks for more projects. I'm just saying, you know. We've got lots of ideas and opportunities, and we're working closely with our First Nations community. And as you're aware, while you were off on your hiatus, we still were working and we have our housing plan in place now, our strategy, and we're ready to kind of work that across the board along some of the lines that we talked about before you went away for a bit. The other piece of that, I think, is that you should be aware we also put into place the new official community plan, our zoning bylaw. So we now have enabled alternate accessory units throughout the city. So secondary suites, carriage houses, what some would call coach house, I always get it wrong, lane houses and accessory dwellings, right? So, and that's an effort to kind of provide more housing stock in the community, kind of across the spectrum in all neighborhoods. And I think it will get at both the affordability and the quality issue through that process. Because again, you offer rent subs through QSS and others, and we're always looking for next stage housing. And I think that as people get stabilized in the bridges or to get stabilized in DeKalb, we're hoping that we're starting to build a complement of the secondary housing and tertiary housing that will help them move along the housing continuum. We have also put in place and strengthened our safe housing bylaw tools, nuisance properties, and then our kind of safe rental housing. So we do have that capacity, as we talked about before you sort of went off for a bit there. We do have those tools now, and we're actively engaged with renters, landlords, others in trying to improve the overall rental housing stock as well in terms of safety and quality. And again, you know, I think it's very helpful in the housing continuum. So we haven't been laggard on all of our aspirations of what we wanted to achieve on housing writ large. I think, Mel, with respect to QSS, as we move into bridges and the supportive housing, and I have some specific questions about the clientele for there, one of the things I do think we need to be, you know, much clearer on as we move forward is the characterization of the city in many cases as being a stumbling block for housing or a stumbling block for the bridges complex or whatever the case may be. I think the reality is that we have a bigger, more comprehensive obligation to the community. We have to position all development within the context of our official community plan, our zoning bylaw, and public safety writ large. And you both know we've had the conversations with you where we're the ones that get the questions of, when we're so shy on seniors housing, why are we investing so much in housing for people who are going to get free housing, free supports, etc., when we've got seniors who can't get the housing that they need? We're not a housing agent, we don't build housing, but we get all those questions. And we get all of the questions associated with public safety around mental health and addictions, even though we don't have the resources or the tools to deal with the issues of mental health and addictions, other than through some of our enforcement opportunities and our partnerships with Northern Health. So, you know, that's the context for us always having to be asking the broader questions, the bigger questions, the community questions. The question that I've got specific to bridges has to do with the current clientele of the Seasons House and what the expectation is as you start looking at populating bridges. What's the expectation of the current clientele of Seasons House moving in and getting the kinds of housing supports they need in the new complex? Is there a proportion you can share? Is there a sense of how much of that client group may be served better over at bridges? And then a question that's floating in the community, and I believe we've asked during this process, is this Quesnel's supportive housing, or is this regional? Is it provincial? You know, can people be bumped from Kelowna to here or Prince George to here to get into the bridges supportive housing? That's a question that's floating around. Is this additional incremental housing for Quesnel residents who are at risk of homelessness or needing support? So two kind of related questions.
So I'll comment on the second one there. Yeah, I mean, it's a provincial resource. However, it is to meet the needs of the homeless of Quesnel. and those at risk of homelessness in Quesnel, and those who need supportive housing in Quesnel. So no, people won't be sent from any other community up here. As a matter of fact, we got this type of housing going in almost a number of communities across the province. It's really quite something at this point. So no, we want to support and give preference to all the residents that need that housing in Quesnel.
Thanks, Malachy. So no bus loads where the mayor gets a kickback for the bus loads coming in?
No, I told you before, we can't do that.
Yeah. So, but you know what I'm talking about. That's why that question's floating out there, right?
I get that a lot.
Yeah.
I do get that a lot. And no, it's not, the intent isn't for that at all. But to say that it's not a provincial resource, I would be respectful in that piece too, right?
Yeah.
So,
no, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Melanie, what about your current client group at Seasons?
Well, I just want to add to that, that all the applications currently are long-term Quesnel residents. And I think with that tenant selection process, you have a collaborative process of many service providers who are coming to a table and saying, you know, this is the individual we've been working with for a long time and we feel would be a really good fit over there. So it's not just us, it's a collaborative effort between many of us who are working with these individuals, their mutual clients. And so I think everyone has a vested interest in ensuring that it's our local Quesnel residents that are housed over there. In regards to the client mix, I think that there's a little bit of an art to that we have BC Housing at the table with us to assist us with. You don't want to overload a facility with 28 really high needs, really complex clients. And so you really want, it really is an art about getting the right tenant mix. And BC Housing is going to assist us with that. Frank Tick has been assigned to that for us, and he's been really helpful. The other piece of that is that some of the information at times that is taken out of local homeless counts helps to assist in that tenant selection process. So it's not just how many homeless people there are in a community. It looks at demographics like how many are Indigenous, how many are seniors, how many are youth, how many have mental health issues, substance use issues, brain damage, stuff like that. So it does collect some of that information, and it's best practice to look at your tenancy that is reflective of what's out there in the community. So for example, if 10% of your homeless population is seniors, then you may want to look at trying to ensure that 10% of your facility has seniors in it, homeless seniors. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, again, I know this is sort of putting you on the spot a little bit, but one of the ongoing dialogues we've had is the relative sort of picking up on the needs that are in the Seasons house into Bridges. And I think when the DeKalb one comes on stream, which would be a high barrier or at least a medium barrier, whatever they end up being, we're going to end up with 65 or close to 70 supportive units. The question in the community, so how many of our current people who are using Seasons house, even if it's proportional, will end up not needing that shelter capacity because their needs are being met in a more appropriate manner. So, and I'm hearing from you, Mel, that that's not that simple to be able to say, about 50% or 60% of current Seasons house clientele should be housed or have the potential to be housed in Bridges.
I think it is hard to put a percentage on that at this point in time, because we really have to take a look at what their needs are. You might have a number of individuals with severe mental health issues and we'd be working with Northern Health, who would also sit at that table to determine, is this the appropriate housing for them? Do they need a different type of housing? Because I think as we move forward, and thanks for the good comments there, Mayor, you know, we have to look at all our housing options coming up in the future for those that don't fit into, whether it be bridges or whether it be into the new DELCATHA supportive housing model. Some individuals are not well, and it's really hard to keep them housed. But that again is you know, it's good to have Northern Health here and just have a discussion with them. Okay, so now what happens, right?
Yeah.
How do you support these individuals, not only in housing, but if you don't have the proper supports in them, it's hard to keep them housed.
Yeah.
And that is the reason that you have Northern Health as a primary partner through the tenant selection process, is because for us as a society, we can't bring in 28 individuals with really complex needs without the assurance that we'll have healthcare intervention and supports in place for them. So that is the goal of having them as a primary partner at that table for that tenant selection process, because we need that commitment.
Yeah, and so I'd see Councillor Goulet here, and so just to finish off my comments. So there's a couple of things here. I do think in the phrase hard to house is used quite often. I don't think the public really understands what that means and what the issues are. You know, we've been involved in it enough that we know that some people who are currently hard to house either in the shelter or who end up squatting in our community, it's because they don't have that self-contained unit, that ability to sort of maintain their own physical space, etc. So when Bridges opens, they may not be hard to house in that kind of a housing setting, but right now they are hard to house, right? So that's why it's so nuanced. Whereas for some people, the fact that they're isolated in a standalone unit or whatever the case may be, may actually trigger them because they need to be in a more social setting or whatever the case. So I think that idea of what constitutes hard to house and the nuance around determining what housing is appropriate is something that's missing in the public education around this very complex matter that causes lots of confusion. So the questions that we get as council members is, how many people in that shelter are going to be over at that building? It's that simple and straightforward for lots of folks. That's why I kept pressing on the percentage, Mel, because that's the questions we get asked. Is it going to be 80%? Is it going to be 90%? Like, how many are going over there? So I think as you evolve your online presence, your FAQs, etc., that's a domain that I think some people could really benefit from a greater degree of explanation. So, Councillor Goulet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to follow up. Mel was talking about the homeless, and I know that there was a homeless count that was done. And has there going to be any results made out or anything that's going to come out? I think there was a deadline that something would come out in June showing what that count looks like, because that's a huge direction that we need to go to when we look at what services and the shelter and the entire wraparound things that are needed for our community. So I just wanted to get clarification on, has there been numbers put out, or is there a report going to come out that outlines what the homeless has said specifically within Quesnel? And then a second part of the question too, I think where we need to look at is defining the difference between a shelter. What is a shelter? I think confuses a lot of individuals within the community. Like what is it, and what does that entail, right? Because Bridges is going to do the housing, some wraparound service. So what is a shelter going to look like moving forward? But I think if there is homeless counts or that information is available, I'd like to see that sent out if you can, Mel. Thank you.
Absolutely, Tony. As soon as that information is released to us, we plan to share that with the city, and it was projected to be released to us June at some point. I do know that some of the homeless counts for other communities, the information has been released, so I expect it should be fairly soon. As well, I'm thinking it might be useful to share with you some information that DC Housing has done up, and we did provide it at some of our public sessions around the continuum of housing. And so that could outline what shelter looks like, what transitional housing looks like, what supportive housing looks like. So I can look that information up and I can provide that to you.
Okay. So on the bridges or Elliott Street, any further questions before we move on to the Carson or Seasons House? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, Malachy. Why don't you move us on to that final slide on Carson Avenue?
Okay, thank you. I just want to go back myself for a bit, and Bob, to your remarks. And you know, I think you know as well as I had numerous discussions around housing in Quesnel. I've always been extremely supportive of the housing and the needs of the Quesnel citizens. Hence, we have the Delketh elders. We have the Lions seniors, we have the bridges, we have the other Delketh on Front Street, our COVID response to isolate individuals, the financial support for the Northern Health for their program reviews. Very committed to the whole community and what we can do. And now that I'm back in the saddle, I plan to keep going down that road. I think there's other housing options that we have to look at, and ones that would support the community. And I do look forward to having those discussions with you. That said, Carson Avenue Shelter. They'll continue to operate the shelter on Carson. As I stated here, they're meeting the requirements of BC Housing's operating requirements. And I said that I would send you some information in and around that piece. A good neighbor agreement does exist between the City of Quesnel and the Quesnel Shelter and Support Society. And of course, that's concerns raised by the neighbors will be addressed in that process. BC Housing and the City of Quesnel and QSS will work in partnership to determine the level of shelter services required to meet the needs of the community following the opening of Bridges Supportive Housing on Elliott Street. One of the things that we talked about way back when is we said, so what happens to the shelter when we start getting people housed in this supportive housing and other housing options through the rent subs, etc. And we had said at that point that BC Housing and certainly the city and QSS that we're going to work together on finding that new location. It was then, it changed a little bit to wait until this Bridges was built and maybe even the Front Street project for that matter. And that was to take a look at what is going to be the shelter needs when all that's completed. I think you probably remember those conversations, Mayor. And how big would it need? How many beds do you need? What does it look like? That still has to be determined because we'll have to see what the outcome is. And to your point, Bob, the percentage or the number of individuals that would go from the shelter over to Bridges and be housed, how does that change the dynamics of the shelter or the size of the shelter? I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Mel, did you want to add anything before open for council questions?
No, I don't think so. I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Council, questions with respect to Seasons House or the Carson Avenue? Councillor Paul?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is there a life expectancy on the existing structure of Seasons House?
I don't have that document. We have done a full review of that building though. We've done a building condition assessment on it. I don't have that documentation in front of me, Councillor Paul, to say what the life expectancy is on different parts of that building or the overall building in front of me. I could probably get you some information on that report though.
And I think I can speak to some of that as well. Over the past few years, a number of critical issues that needed addressing at this facility were addressed in regards to sinkholes, some of the plumbing, piping underneath the buildings, roofing, flooring. Like we've done a number of upgrades, or BC Housing has done a number of upgrades on the facility. We're due for another big renovation in the near future and an electrical upgrade with that. So they are addressing those critical issues as they come up with us.
Councillor Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a supplementary to that, then if you are planning major upgrades, does that tell me that you plan on being in that location for some time to come?
No, I don't think it means that. What it means, Councillor, is that we need to ensure the safety and security of the staff and residents who use that shelter. There is also supportive housing in that building also. So it is about the safety and security and keeping it, ensuring that it's safe. On that note, though, I think, as I was just saying, there's a commitment by myself and by the city and QSS that once we get the supportive housing up, we'll see what the impact is on that shelter and look for another location that'll meet the needs of those that continue to be homeless in Quesnel.
Director Turner?
Good. I'm glad you said that, Malachy, because I believe we've all been at the table and said that shelter is a problem in terms of the way it is structured. And the consultant that you brought down, Catherine, to do the mediate session, who's quite experienced in shelters, has been all over the province and viewed many shelters, was horrified at the shelter, saying it's an absolute safety and security. She never went in. Safety and security issue just from the design of it, especially how it's designed in terms of lack of access control for shelter users and the transition housing. She was horrified by it. And we all had that discussion at the table actually after, and all agreed that that was the case. So I think that is something that we need to put on if that is the goal, to improve safety and security. I think we need to up that timeline a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the other piece, of course, is the location on the highway has always been an issue too. Councillor Runge.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Malachy, and then Councillor Runge.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting you. I just wanted to say that that's why we're moving forward, and that's why we had those discussions at the early stage about finding a new location that would meet the needs of the community and also meet the needs of the downtown businesses, et cetera.
Okay. Councillor Runge.
Yes, thank you. Melanie, my question, I guess, is to you with because we saw with the Elliott Street project, they have a timeline 9:30 till 10 p.m. because, you know, as a downtown business owner and also seeing a lot of things that happen down there, we know that it's a few years before all buildings will be in place. So for me, I'm looking at, is there like a timeline that the residents of the shelter should be inside? Like, are they in that 9:30, 10 till 10 p.m. also, or do they have an open access in and out of the building, you know, throughout all hours of the evening? Because for me, I mean, that's what I see, that's what I hear, and you know, and going downtown, it's many times I'm not sure if they're actually residents or if they're just others that are just hanging around at that time.
Thanks, Martin, for the question. So we don't have the ability to put curfews on any population of people. What you're seeing at the Bridges facility, the 9:30 to 10, I think what you're seeing there is our visitors policy for when we open that up for visitors. There will be no visitors for the first 3 months in order to build a sense of community, and then following that strict visiting hours that'll be in place and some strict guidelines. And we don't have the ability to enact a curfew. People are free to come and go out of shelter just like they really are anywhere else. What we do is we have a time right now we're closed to the public, obviously still, but we have a time that we do close our doors here at the shelter. And for some individuals, I mean, it's a really complex population we work with. So some individuals, really difficult to get them from stopping going in and out at night. Others, it's not. They are a little bit more compliant and they can follow those guidelines. some individuals who we might say, no more, you are being too disruptive, you can't come in and out all night long. And we'll prevent them from coming in if it's not winter, of course, and we'll say, sorry, you've been in and out, people are sleeping in our drop-in area, it's too disruptive. If you're not coming in to sleep, then you can't come in anymore tonight. So it's really on an individual by individual basis. We also work with people, there's one in particular who I think is in and out of here all night long through the community, puts 1,000 miles on a day. And when we close that door to him and say, listen, you can't come in and out, he jumps a fence. And he's not a risk, he's not violent, and we're not going to call the RCMP to have him removed and use those resources. So it's really, you know, in that instance, there's a lot of brain damage happening and there's a lot of other complex issues. And so it's really for us looking at who the individual is and how we can manage the behaviors. And if we closed our doors at 10 o'clock and said no more access to anyone, then there'd be a whole lot of people who do come to us at, say, like midnight and do want to come in and lay down and go to sleep, who potentially would be left out in community and on business doorsteps. So it's just not a black and white situation. That's, yeah.
Yeah,
I
just,
hope that helps.
what kind of, it's you know, it's that, I guess it's the public unknown to things, because, you know, yes, they want the support. No, they don't want to just have, we don't know who actually is a member of the Seasons House or of Elliott Street later. So the open door, open visitation policy, if there's someone in the shelter that knows the clients and knows whether they actually are, you know, from the outside, it's really hard for us to gauge as we're going by, and then we get possibly, you know, these inconsistent viewpoints on things that might be totally false, but, you know, we see other sides, and so then, you know, that's where I think we get some of the negative.
Malachy, I wonder if you can comment from a provincial perspective, because we have been told, and members of our community have been told, that there are homeless shelters that do work on hard registration. So if you're not actually utilizing the shelter services, you don't belong in the shelter. There's no visitation, there's no coming and going. Shelters that do not provide harm reduction, you know, open harm reduction supplies, open food, etc. So they are truly a shelter. They have restricted hours and they have restricted access. Is that a model that exists in communities in British Columbia or no?
You know, I can only speak for the North. I don't have any of those in the North, Mayor. I can't really say what happens in other communities. In some communities, you might have a number of different shelters, not just one like we have in Quesnel, where they might have different options that they could provide. But I certainly don't have any in the North.
Okay, because that is something that's thrown in our face a lot around the comparison of shelters to shelters, for example. And of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate, but it is out there. So go ahead, Mel.
I'm sorry, I just want to clarify that we are closed to public access. I mean, we're closed to public access right now because of COVID 24/7. But in regular times, we are closed to public access at 9 p.m. So people don't just get to come in and visit and hang out. If they're coming into the shelter, then they are a shelter client.
Okay, so again, for clarity, because the model is going to be a subject of discussion relative to potential relocation. And that goes for harm reduction supplies and food, Mel, that, you know, are you a public venue beyond your shelter clients or your recovery bed or your supportive housing clients? Are you a public venue at Seasons House for harm reduction supplies and food? And is there a hard stop, if that's the case, at 9 o'clock?
Yeah, we send people when in normal times, not COVID. Again, right now, we're not providing any of those services to the public except on an outreach basis. But in normal times, outside of COVID, we send people to the hospital after hours for harm reduction. there have been times people refuse to go there. There's a lot of resistance to going to the hospital to access those health supports. And so staff have handed stuff out the door, but we don't provide food services either to the community, to the public after hours.
Okay. Other questions from council? Councillor Vic?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Melanie, I guess I'm going to tag on to what Councillor Runge was saying regarding some behaviors from people that are using your services, but often we're not able to determine where some of these individuals are staying. But I think in fairness that it's commingled. And I certainly respect what you were saying regarding some individuals are very challenging, but they're not dangerous. And I absolutely respect that. But at some point we have to reconcile what some of the activities these individuals are doing. And we're talking about maybe this individual who is difficult to keep indoors during the night because this individual just needs to be on the move. But at some point we have to reconcile that these individuals are causing harm to business owners in terms of petty crime or unearthing bins, garbage bins, things like this, and it causes some harm to the businesses trying to make a living in the downtown core. At what point can we really depend on the shelter to really come up with some meaningful policies that can take a load off of businesses that continue to struggle with this issue again and again and again?
Thanks, Mitch. I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I think that if we go to hard and fast policies on that, that's going to put a lot of people outdoors without access to our services. Without that flexibility for so many of the individuals we work with, they wouldn't be able to access our services at all, which would render them outdoors. I think you would see a larger population of people who are homeless and living outdoors and living in tents. And I don't think I even legally have a right to hold people indoors. We don't even have legally the right to have our door locked from the inside. It has to be, people have to have access to the outside. And so shelters, especially standalone shelters in small communities like ours, it is known to be best practice to try and be as accessible as you possibly can to the homeless population, which sometimes presents a lot of challenges. When you have multiple shelters in a community, you can have different operating models. When you have one, you try and keep your doors open to as many people as possible. And when we close those doors to people who are incredibly complex, who have extreme mental health or substance use issues, or brain damage or developmental disabilities, whatever that looks like, all you're doing is closing the door on them. And often there aren't other services available to them.
Is our call for service at that shelter? Other questions?
I just want to say one thing. That's why we try to work closely with Northern Health, because as you heard Mel just say, right? I mean, a lot of this is around mental health, and we certainly need their support as we move forward. And we work with them closely on these things because a number of those individuals do suffer from severe mental health issues that cause them to have to go walk all night and come in and out. It's a difficult task for us all, but that's why you need those strong partnerships with the health authority.
Yeah, thank you, Malachy. And we have our newly anointed staff sergeant here finally, sitting in the back, just barely in the screen. Darren Dodge. So again, Malachy, switch over, or Andrew went south into the nosebleed part of the organization. And Darren's now got the nod for leading here at the detachment. But I just asked him quickly because I was aware that we've had a significant drop in calls for services during the COVID restrictions at the senior center. at Seasons House. And so that lack of that public engagement, if you will, or access. And so I do think as we look at what model we're talking about relocating a shelter, to, I think we need to do a bit of a debrief as to why we have these high calls for service, and then we get to this point where because of COVID, we restrict public access and our calls for service drop significantly. And it's significant enough, it's not statistical. And I think that gives us a data point that we should be having a conversation about with respect to the operating model. So go ahead, Mel.
I just want to add to that it's not just a closure of drop-in services. It's also the fact that we have social distancing spaces in the community. So we just don't have the same number of individuals with really high needs cramped into one space. And that's something that we've been saying for a lot of years, that we need more space, we need more beds, and we need housing. And so we're moving forward on a lot of those things, and our temporary social distancing rooms that we have at the Grace Inn have helped with that as well, as has closing to the public.
Yeah, so Mel, you're just reinforcing my point. There's a conversation begged as a result of that. If there's a model that reduces the call for service for RCMP, that call for service reduction must be reflected in more safe environment for the clients of Seasons House, and that also creates a better public safety environment outside of Seasons House, and also frees up our RCMP resources to deal with some of the property crime and various other things we've got. So there's a number of benefits that we accrue as a result of a change in operating practice, that I think it behooves us to sit down together and say, what was that change and how can we enable that circumstance to continue post-COVID, so that we learn from that experience. So, and I think, Malachy, it's pertinent to the conversation of, okay, so now if you're looking to relocate, how do you relocate in a way that you've got as many of those circumstances coming to bear as you possibly can, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll have that discussion as we move forward, Mayor. I think, though, Mel brought up a good point around the social distancing, and why we rented the rooms at the Grace that we did was to create that social distancing. And some individuals have moved from the shelter into those independent units at the Grace. And it appears that it's had, if we could say it to that, it's had a huge impact, right? So, which is great. As I said at the beginning, we've also extended that for another 3 months now, till the end of September. If those numbers keep showing, the low numbers of police response, I think we have to look at that. And I think that's what it says when you put people into independent housing and get some supports for them, the difference it can make. So
yeah.
I'm looking forward to the next 3 months. Who knows when the COVID thing's going to be over at this point. That's why we're extending it another 3 and seeing how it goes from there. I think looking at a report by Dr. Henry, that it looks like, they had one of their largest days recently, I believe. It'll be interesting how we move forward with that, but we're keeping it there in Quesnel to support those individuals and to keep that separation. And so that's a good thing.
Yep. Okay. Other questions or comments from council members with respect to the shelters portion of the housing? Councillor Vic.
Thank you. Malachy, I guess this one would be directed to you. It seems just from our discussion this evening, and from the system being in effect during COVID with the extra 13 suites at Grace Inn, is it fair to say that this could be a potential model where it could relieve stress from a shelter, or could this be something a community could move forward with on a permanent basis if it achieved its goals?
I would look at every housing options, to be honest with you, Councillor Vic, that would support the needs of the community. So if there's a way, and again, we have the bridges opening up, which will have an impact again, But if I could get a way through rent subs or something of that nature to keep individuals housed where they are at now, then I want to do that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from council members? Seeing none, any final comments, Malachy or Mel?
Go ahead, Mel.
I don't have any, well, I guess I do have some final comments. I just want to say I really appreciate the open discussion. I think that this population, it's a population of individuals that most people aren't familiar with working with, and I would just like to extend to you all that call me up or feel free to reach out to me anytime you have those questions, whether they're a question coming from a community member or not. I'm happy to answer them, and I'm happy to enter into that dialogue. So we're very excited about the opening of bridges, and we look forward to working with the city moving forward on that.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you too. Glad I'm back. This is my first in front of any council, so it's always interesting to how you get back into the fold. But thanks again, and you know, I think we're right. We just need to keep the communication open. Look at the changes that have happened because of COVID-19. What can we learn from that? What can we keep going after that? And again, as I've said before, I'm always concerned about the whole community. And, you know, just with the amount of housing and other things we're doing in Quesnel and the housing that we got coming up, I think it's an exciting time. And hopefully we'll look down the road and see a number of these issues resolved in a positive way for not only for the community, but for those that suffer from mental health and addiction issues and be able to get the support that they need.
Thanks, Malachy. And just on behalf of council, thanks for spending this time with us. I think it is important that we have a public dialogue around these two facilities. The takeaways, just council, just a reminder to take a look at the Shelter Society's website and broadcast the save the date for anybody who's been asking you questions. It's their opportunity to get direct answers to that. And I think we've got two follow-up conversations to be had. I would suggest maybe Malachy and Mel, we take one of our fall public safety and policing committee and have a bit of a conversation about what the reduction in call for services, especially if it continues, says about, you know, from our perspective, deployment of RCMP resources, and from your perspective, what it says about improving safety for your clients, et cetera. So I think that's one conversation. And then of course, the other conversation that you have flagged, Malachy, is the conversation about the shelter's future and the relocation of the shelter. And again, as I said at the outset, I would hope, and Malachy, you mentioned it, that respect would be given to the city on social media and with respect to some of the advocates for the client group that you've spoken about, Mel, that as a council, we have an obligation to the city writ large. Our obligation goes across a wide spectrum. And when we engage in a dialogue about any particular aspect of the community or its citizens, we have to do the balancing act of saying yes, but we also have to take into consideration these other things. But as you should know, we're all in on the housing front, and we would like to see appropriate housing for all members of our community as well. So we appreciate the partnership. So thank you both. You can zoom out now, and we'll continue with the rest of our meeting. Thanks for spending the time with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. All right, moving on to our regular agenda. I've moved to the Executive Committee report of June 17th. Councillor Roodenburg.
Thank you. Just let me get to it here. Sorry. Apologies. Hold on here.
Councillor Vic and Councillor Runge, while Councillor Roodenburg's looking for her report. In our Brady Bunch view that we get here, every once in a while, it looks like you two guys are nose to nose and whispering at each other. So Councillor Runge, you keep turning to your right, and Councillor Vic, you keep turning to your left. And it's quite disconcerting on our end how close you two are in the world of social distancing. So anyway.
Yeah, it's because I got another screen there where I'm reading these late agenda items.
That's all good. It's all good. Councillor Roodenburg, floor is yours.
Thank you. So this is a report that came from our executive committee from June 17th. There was a bit of a kerfuffle around emailing the report, so apologies that you only received it this afternoon. So as you can see, the highlights of the most recent executive committee meeting. There are no upcoming community engagement pieces, so City Manager Johnson's off the hook for that one. Director Turner did have a discussion with us around subdivision covenants in regards to flooding and erosion issues. We do have a local service area policy that to guide requests for involvement in providing residential support for erosion or flooding incidences. But it's to be known that the city will not engage in protecting impacted homeowners unless they're willing to participate in the costs of the work. This policy is going to be referred to PAPCOM for an update. We had a brief discussion around what an anti-racism bylaw might look like in regards to the fact that we were sent a couple of different variations from Vidstone and Company, our lawyers. It was discussed and felt that our city code of conduct and council code of conduct and ethics policy captures much of the internal corporate concerns addressed by any anti-racism bylaw. So there are no recommendations coming from that. A brief discussion around the North Cariboo Joint Advisory Committee strategic planning discussion. It was asked at our last meeting if we would like to host strat planning discussion. So actually that happened today. We had a brief talk with Director Glassford and CRD staff along with our own city manager and Director Norburn. And it looks like we'll be hosting that meeting on September 8th. And we'll be looking at discussing something around a midterm review to kind of talk about what we've done in the past 2 years and how we're going to move forward. We also talked a little bit about about some of our major infrastructure and what our priorities are. So this is the reason why it's not in here is because that meeting just happened today. So there'll be several reports coming forward in regards to that strat planning. And they'll talk about things like curling, the performing arts, gymnastics, the pool, some of our major projects that potentially could be coming forward. And a lot of the discussion will also look at what are the costs of delaying projects. You know, so we're hoping to get a report from staff in regards to that line of thinking.
Councillor, before we move on from that, so council will recall at the last joint planning, there was a bit of a concerted effort on the part of the northern directors to try and advance a discussion of a as quickly as possible strategic planning session. At the board meeting on Friday, I asked a question around the minutes from the North Cariboo Rural Directors meeting, because there was a minuted item that said they had a discussion about services not covered under North Cariboo Rec. And when I asked for clarification on that, it was kind of circumspect. They were just kind of talking about stuff that may not be in Rec. So did anything come up in terms of preparing an agenda for items that they feel are missing or should be included?
The only thing they talked about, Director Glassford brought up the potential for a trails function and what that might look like, and how that would include or not include trails that are within the city boundaries, because that occurs throughout the entire CRD. So I think that was the only piece in regards to that piece of
Yeah, and so at the committee of the whole meeting on Thursday of the CRD, they did have that trails function, parks and trails function discussion. And that would be Caribou Regional District wide, so there wouldn't be any exclusion zones. And of course, as you're aware, some of our current trail development is actually outside the rec boundaries. And so that could be part of what's going on. Okay, thanks.
Okay. So Council Code of Conduct discussion, recommending to the Policy and Bylaw Committee that the Code of Conduct policy be updated to include internally generated investigation of council conduct. We also talked a little bit about the misinformation relative to the gold pan move, and that report will be coming forward later this evening. Canada Day discussions. We talked about the fact that we can't host anything that generates copious quantities of people gathering together. So stole an idea from another community, and we're going to be doing have an opportunity for the community to show us how they celebrate Canada Day, what it means for them to be Canadian. And so I have to give kudos to the staff here from our projects person through to economic development, all came together, and there should be something coming out very shortly online, also through other various forms of media in regards to this contest where you can submit a photo. We have prizes that are, there will be 3 prizes, and between 3 prizes, $1,000 worth of gift cards. So it actually is part of that whole shopping local campaign also. So it kind of ticks off a couple boxes. So that will be sent out shortly. I thought it was supposed to be today, but I kept looking for it. So it will hit our social media, and it'll also be in the paper, and I believe we're doing a blip on the radio too.
So Manager Reed just magically appeared on the Brady Bunch screen. Go ahead, Amy.
It's live on the Explore Quesnel Facebook page as of today as an event, and then it will be boosted and promoted more, but we just wanted to get the event up there today, have a day to make sure that it's all working properly, and then we'll start boosting it, I think, tomorrow.
Perfect. So if you have an opportunity, Council, to hit that page and share the event, that would be wonderful. And I have to say, like I said, the staff here did an amazing job just kind of putting this all together very quickly after our executive committee meeting. Last piece on here is the UMBC request for a Pride sidewalk. This has come up from a staff member at UMBC, and so we are going to organize a meeting with the Quesnel Pride Society and UMBC to discuss the concept of a Pride crosswalk or some other variation of something that showcases our Pride community.
So I did meet with the leadership of the Pride Society when we did the flag raising yesterday, as per council's motion at our last meeting. I did chat with them about a sidewalk because, as we talked at our last meeting, you know, the ongoing dialogue we've had with the Pride Society is a sidewalk the thing? In many communities, it becomes a divisive thing because you're actually manipulating, you know, physical taxpayer-funded infrastructure to achieve some kind of symbolic end. So they agreed that that's not what they want to achieve. So we will be getting together to look at something that's more interesting in Quesnel rather than just following the norm that somehow, not sidewalks, rather crosswalks are the thing, that we can be more creative than that and do something that represents inclusivity more meaningfully. So we'll have that conversation in the fall.
Excellent. So we'll take that off our action item list. We get our action item list bigger and then it just goes through. So we do have one recommendation here.
Yeah, and I think it's best, just the way this is coming forward as a recommendation, it's actually a piece that's going, we've said is going back to policy committee.
Right.
So it's better that we actually do the wordsmithing and policy and then bring it back for council as the policy. Because this is awkwardly, like, it
Telling,
doesn't,
telling them what to do.
yeah, you're sort of saying we're going to do something before we've actually written what we think we want, how we want to position it.
Sounds good.
So that would be my suggestion, is it just comes back from PABCOM.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, back to council as for formally adopting the revised policy. Yeah. Okay.
So it's just an action item to send it to
PABCOM. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, the report is as presented then.
Questions or comments on the executive report? Seeing none, we'll move on. We're going to adopt the adopted in the agenda process. So, okay, next item on the agenda is city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the purpose of this report is to have a discussion around the facts regarding the gold pan sign relocation, which includes when this issue was brought to council, the relevant resolutions, and the voting record. The intent behind this report is to fact check the statements made by Councillor Paul recently in the media and during a community rally at the gold pan site. It should be noted that this discussion is not about the rights or wrongs of moving the gold pan sign. It's about how are council decisions made and how are they represented in the public. As council is probably aware, I've done in the past a couple of these fact correction and setting the record straight type little reports to council in the past. So this is not the only time this is being used, this tool. So first off, timeline. After a very, very extensive public engagement process, the rebranding initiative was concluded on January 17, 2017. At that public council meeting, the new City of Quesnel brand was formally endorsed by council. Included in the brand report on that initiative was the following statement by one of the consultants, Stormy Lake Consulting, who was working on the file, which was around symbolic gestures and a number of potential symbolic actions representing brand-driven change in Quesnel that could be considered include install new gateway signage with new identity north and south of the city, repaint the gold pan sign, remove the gold pan city text. It should be noted that at that meeting, there was an extensive discussion on the future desired location for the gold pan. So that's probably the first public record of that discussion. And in fact, it was covered off by local media. George covered this story on January 18th, 2017. So it was not only a public discussion in council, but it was in the written media as well. This first public discussion and reporting on the gold pan location was 3.5 years ago. The gold pan is still in place. It reflects that this is a long, slow process. Not that something's being hidden, it's just been a long, slow process. So the resolutions and voting record related to the gold pan sign. On January 2017, council endorsed the City of Quesnel branding strategy, including that discussion of moving the gold pan. The placemaking and wayfinding plan included more discussion about the new entrance sign, voted on by council a year and a half later in July 24, 2018. Because this project is very significant to Quesnel, the same presentation was brought to another open council meeting with the new council, this council sitting around the table, on November 27, 2018 for reaffirmation. So that same report came twice. In 2019, once we got closer to the point of having to actually relocate that sign, the executive committee discussed potential new locations for the gold pan sign. On October 9th, 2019, the executive committee made the following recommendation. Moved Councillor Paul and seconded Councillor Goulet, and resolved that the executive committee recommend that Quesnel City Council approve the relocation of the gold pan from its current site on Highway 97 North to the BCR rail lands adjacent to the station house located at 710 Legion Drive, Quesnel, and that the committee requests that the funding for relocation and refurbishing of the gold pan be included in the City of Quesnel's 2020 budget. That was carried. Subsequent to that, that resolution came before, from the executive committee, came before open council meeting, where the idea was endorsed by council as per the resolution below. A different mover on this one moved Councillor Roodenburg, seconded Councillor Goulet, and resolved that council approves the executive committee recommendation to relocate the gold pan. That was carried 5-2. Opposed was Councillor Paul, noted as being opposed. Issues and misrepresentations by Councillor Paul. Councillor Paul represents the decisions related to the gold pan relocation as being unilateral decisions made by the mayor. The voting record indicates that this is not, or that this is a complete misrepresentation. The decision to select a new brand, which did not include the gold pan image or the word gold, was approved by council. The decision to develop a wayfinding and signage project, which included new entrance signs on the north and south, was approved by the previous council and this council. The decision to retain a refurbished gold pan sign in a prominent part of the city was also approved by a vote of council following a recommendation by the executive committee. Those are not unilateral actions by one individual. Secondly, Councillor Paul stated to a reporter that the gold pan relocation discussion was discreetly buried in the new signage plan. This is not true, based on the fact that we had already dealt with it in the city branding a year and a half earlier, and we had already had public media reporting on it a year and a half earlier. Councillor Paul also stated that his concept of using the gold pan as a functional gold pan in order to achieve a Guinness record was shut down by the mayor. While Councillor Paul has mentioned this idea several times, he has never brought forward a feasible plan to make it happen. I know from a strictly staff perspective, the concerns around liability would make this project very, very difficult to achieve. And so far, I have not personally seen a feasible plan come forward. Councillor Paul received a letter from the mayor on December 12, 2019, which restricts his activities on behalf of council. Councillor Paul's continued misrepresentation about council and the mayor's role on council were the reason behind this sanction, not for having an opinion, as stated by Councillor Paul. Interestingly enough, the current misrepresentation of council by Councillor Paul about the gold pan continues the trend that led to that letter being issued. It should be noted that this letter, when it was sent from the mayor, was denoted personal and confidential. However, Councillor Paul chose to mention this at a public rally, thereby breaking confidentiality. The recommendation is none, that this report is received for information only. No course of action is recommended. A policy which I think underlies all of this is that under our Code of Conduct and Ethics policy suggests the conduct of members of council must be fair, open, respectful, and honest. There's a bunch of other policy statements under that Code of Conduct which could possibly apply in this situation, but since we've all been through that code so many times, I didn't think it was worth the time of council to bring them all out there. But there is a number of different wordings that could apply as well. So concludes my report, Mr.
Thank you. So just for council's edification, this is simply a correction of the public record. It's not an intention to engage in a discussion. It's just simply a fact check, and that's how we've treated it in the past. However, it is an agenda item, and so if council members wish to speak to the agenda item, I can't stop them from doing so. Councillor Paul. You have to unmute, Councillor Paul.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Full disclosure, I hope I will not be called out of order. I respectfully ask Mayor and Council's indulgence as I will be reading parts of my following statement, as I need to be methodically accurate as I refer to specific events and their timelines throughout. Also pursuant to Council Procedure Bylaw 1859, Section 9, subsection D, I have a maximum of 15 minutes to present my defense. I will be using only a portion of my permitted time, as I intend to show Council that any and all statements made by me about the gold pan issues are true, proving the allegations leveled against me are without base and totally defensible. Also, it should be noted that this statement was prepared before the city manager's report was received by me about 2.5 hours ago. I have been accused of A, misrepresenting Council's decision on contents of the July 2018 Wayfinding Program report, and B, for not being truthful about response to my suggestion that we use the move of the gold pan as our opportunity to finally get the gold pan into the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's largest functioning gold pan. My attempt at that failed 33 years ago because we didn't actually use it as a functioning gold pan before we put it up. And C, and this is the third and most serious allegation, that I have breached my sworn oath of office and our council code of conduct. Before I address the allegations, I wish to make 2 points. In my near 15 years on council, I have never received so much feedback and questioning from the public on any issue than the current news about relocating the gold pan. And 2, a quick review of my position and voting on moving the gold pan. I have opposed moving the gold pan since a motion was brought forward to approve the original wayfinding program plan in the summer of 2018. And I did not vote against the wayfinding plan based on the resultant gold pan move alone. I objected to the $1.1 million cost.
Councillor Paul, please do not revisit history that's not pertinent to this. You have not been in the city manager's report. There's no claim that you broke your oath of office. There is no code of conduct violation, and there's no direction from executive that any course of action should be taken. If you are going to respond to this, respond to the pertinent information, which is, did you or did you not say that council, or that the gold pan move was discreetly buried in the wayfinding sign report? So did you or did you not say that? We have a printed version that says you did. Secondly, did you or did you not say that the mayor shut down the fact that you wanted to, not in the past, but in the present, use the gold pan to gold pan with? And did you or did you not state that the reason you got a letter from me reprimanding you for your misrepresentation of council activities was because you were standing with the people and because you had an opinion? Those are only 3 things that you can speak to. We're not going to do a history lesson, and we're not going to go through any of the stories that you want to tell about this. Deal with the 3 facts.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, and I asked for this right at the outset with council's indulgence, and I do address all 3 of these if you will allow me to continue.
Well, continue without the history lessons, Councillor Paul.
Okay. I'm just trying to pick up where I make you happy, Mr. Mayor.
So, Councillor Paul, again, that's a disrespectful statement. Once again, you are characterizing my role as the chair of this council in an inappropriate manner. You're also, once again, attempting to add agenda items under this agenda. So please, with respectful language, recognizing my role as chair to keep order and to make sure people stay on task, deliver your report on the 3 items of substance only.
Okay. Allegation number 1, I implied that the mayor and council acted inappropriately by, quote, burying the gold pan move in the signed strategy document. I'm referring to the July 2018 wayfinding program document. Before I defend myself on this allegation, I must say that upon being questioned as to where a person might find evidence of council's intent to move the gold pan, I directed them to the above mentioned report. Upon being further questioned, I read and reread the report, only to surprisingly find out that I was wrong. There is no mention whatsoever of moving the gold pan in that report.
Councillor Paul, did you or did you not state in an interview that the gold pan move was discreetly buried in the signed report? That's the only thing that's a matter of notice for this meeting. Did you or did you not state that?
Yes, I did.
Is it or is it not true?
Is what not true?
Did council bury the move of the gold pan in the sign report?
No,
Then move on to the next item.
it wasn't even there in the first place.
So again, you're in error and an apology to council would be appropriate at this point, but that's one point. Let's move to the next point. Did you or did you not state that the mayor shut down your idea of panning with the gold pan when it's moved?
Okay. Allegation number 2, that the mayor shot down my idea of panning for the Guinness Book of World Records with the gold pan when moved. Although I suggested my plan to the mayor, he didn't shoot down my idea. The city manager did.
So Councillor Paul, you are admitting that then you lied to the public. We have the video. At the gold pan rally, your statement explicitly with video evidence was, I floated the idea of gold panning with the gold pan to the mayor and he shut it down, to which you got a big cheer. We have a video to that effect. You've just admitted that that was also not true. Move on to your third point then.
I just said that my idea was shot down. I didn't say that it was shot down by the mayor.
No, if you actually watch the video, it links directly to the mayor. So that's item number 2. Item number 3, with respect to the characterization of the letter that you got from the mayor.
No, my allegation number 3 is a breach of office and a breach of the code of conduct.
So again, neither one of those two is alleged in the city manager's report, so you can't speak to those.
Well,
no claim of such has been made.
Okay, I do have an email from you alleging that.
That was an email of correspondence that was, again, an email to council in which I presented them with the fact set. You're dealing with an agenda item. The agenda items from the city manager. The city manager has indicated no such charges against you.
Okay.
So now deal with the final point, which is the characterization of the letter, as simply because you have a matter of opinion, you were shut down by the mayor.
I'm not understanding which letter you're referring to.
You're the one that raised a personal and confidential letter that was given to you when you stood at the gold pan, and you represented to the people there who, by the way, prior to you speaking, said, we live in a dictatorship here, who, by the way, before you spoke, indicated that our process was dishonest, and you as a council member never stood up and protected the integrity of council decision process or protected the integrity of the mayor's office before you went into your own diatribe. But at the end of your diatribe, you claimed to the people who were at that gold pan rally that you had received a letter from the mayor that basically, because you had an opinion and because you choose to stand with the people, you were shut down and stripped of your committees. That was a statement you made that's in video.
And I'm being accused of divulging confidential information.
No, we're saying that that was a letter sent to you, personal and confidential, that you chose to characterize in a way that is not accurate.
Well, I don't believe that that letter was ever marked personal and confidential. If it had
absolutely was. It absolutely was.
That's not the issue.
But it's not the issue. You characterized the letter, which was, again, as a result of a gross misrepresentation of council decision-making process and council's strategic plans to the Friends of the Museum, that you characterize that as simply because you have an opinion and because you choose to stand with the people. So I think, Councillor Paul, you've effectively admitted that what the city manager has indicated is accurate, and all this report does is make sure that the record is set straight. The decision on the goal pan was a transparent decision with multiple votes of council. Do you dispute that?
No, I do not dispute that.
Sorry, is your wife there coaching you?
Is that any of your business?
Well, we just heard a yes.
Well, she's not here. I don't know where you heard a yes from.
Hey, Councillor Paul, do you dispute that it was a transparent process with multiple votes?
What I dispute and what I say is that I'm honestly of the opinion we could have done better in
Councillor
advising.
Paul, do you dispute that it was an open, transparent process with multiple votes?
Yes, I dispute that.
Okay. I guess we'll move on. You've had your say. I will deem this closed. The city manager has set the record straight. You're welcome to your opinion. The one thing you're not welcome to do is to present council's deliberations as dishonest, to present the city as under a dictatorship. You can have all of the contrary opinions you want, but you do have an obligation to respect the democracy and the democratic process of council. Moving on to the next agenda item.
The word dishonest.
Moving on to the next agenda item. Okay, we'll move on to the City of Quesnel Annual Drinking Water Report. Director Coben.
Yes, the annual drinking water report prepared by the utility superintendent. The city describes the water system, provides a summary of water management, an overview, a water quality, water monitoring, including testing during 2019. The report is required under the Drinking Water Regulations, Drinking Water Protection Act. A copy of this report and the results will be made available to the public with hard copy at City Hall, as well as placed on the city's website. And attached is the 2019 report with the attachments including locations, statistics, and summary. And
thank you.
This report is brought forward for information.
Thank you, Director Coben. Questions or comments from council? I'm not seeing any. Okay, Director Coben. Just quickly, Director Coben, just because of the manganese issue and because of public disclosure, what's our sort of time frame around the next dialogue about water treatment options? You know, how is that whole process unfolding?
Yeah, so we, over the winter and spring, we collected all our data. There's quite a lot of data to go through by our consultant Urban Systems, and I expect to have that information, them working on the report and update over the summer, and expect something early fall.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no questions. Thank you, Director Coben. Oh, Councillor Ryan, sorry.
Yes, thank you. And we can move fairly quickly into this. With a number of the wells having exceedances with regards to the manganese specifically, does that put us into any kind of a time frame crunch with regards to having to do something really quickly with regards to other federal policies or related items?
Yeah, we have been in contact with our regulator, Northern Health, and we're not the only community in the province facing this, so we are aware of it, and they are aware of it, and there's been recommendations made that we've posted on the website and made available to the public, so that there is that transparency.
Councillor Paul.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chris, I know that the city is a member of the BC Water and Waste Management Association. Is there any pushback through that association to have the federal government take another look at the guideline numbers for manganese, because in the United States, or areas in the United States, the numbers are a lot more, how would I put it? They're a lot more manageable.
Yeah, no, that this was a long time coming. There was a number of years where the BC Water and Waste Association was aware that the federal guidelines may change. What we didn't know is what the number would be. There's different numbers out there. Different countries have different manganese acceptable levels. The US, the World Health Organization, Australia. So there wasn't any pushback per se. It is a federal guideline that the last time it was reviewed was in the 1980s. So.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, this time I think Director Coben is the thank you, and you can unzoom if you so wish to, or zoom out, whatever the appropriate term is.
Great.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Okay, moving on then to Forestry Initiatives Program and Manager Robinson.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. So the purpose of this report tonight is being submitted by the Forestry Initiatives Program to make Council aware of our research and innovation grant proposal, which is a direct outcome of the forestry think tank process. A summary of the report: the Forestry Initiatives Program, along with our project partners, the College of New Caledonia, UBC, Natural Resources Finland, FP Innovations, and Forest Liaison Inc., are in the process of applying for an R&I grant through the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. The proposed 3-year project is focusing on using outside expertise combined with our strong local partnerships on developing a training school in Quesnel for single grip harvesting and forwarding methods. A full proposal is available upon request. The proposed research project will identify innovative approaches from Eastern Canada and Scandinavia to determine a tailored and Quesnel approach. And the findings from our project will then be scaled up, hopefully, to the provincial level for a how-to on how other training institutions can do this, and also offer the training to students from around the province and maybe even the world. Recommendations are none. This is brought forward for information purposes only. Mayor, should I continue?
Yeah, I think, Aaron, the council needs a little bit of explanation of, you know, how big a shift this would be and how big a program this potentially could be if we're successful.
Sure. So this really matches the new provincial landscape level management planning and the types of fuel management that need to take place across the province. So commercial thinning is a big part of this. How we move into the different profiles on the landscape that are causing the forest health concerns. We have some older stands that need to be managed through selective harvesting for habitat considerations, and also we have a lot of younger stands that we know are infilling and causing wildfire threat to the communities. So it kind of hits those bigger provincial pieces, but to bring this down to the local level, it's a way of training the human resources, you know, capacity building aspect of this. How do you transition the contractors we have and get other contractors working in the field who might not have thought of forest harvesting as a really innovative and high-tech approach to logging, basically.
Yeah, and I think, whoa, big feedback. I think I would add to what Aaron's indicating, so council gets the sense of this. Currently, I think West Fraser's had a crew for their commercial thinning project, and they were from Alberta, I think they had to go out to get the expertise they needed. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We have a few local contractors, local being Prince George and Williams Lake. And there is one person here in Quesnel that moved from Hinton. But yes, there's a demand, and there's not enough people to fill the demand at this time.
And the other piece of it is you start to blend, and this is West Fraser's chief forester sort of was talking to us about this during our think tank process. You start to blend sort of a forest technician mindset with a machine operator capability with these funky machines. And we should get a video to council at some point to sort of understand the nature of these machines and why They're actually attractive to a younger generation. That combination of, you know, they're not just going out to a block and basically creating a moonscape by full clear cut logging and dumping it on the roadside, and then it all goes out. They're actually making interactive forest management decisions, if you will. The sorting logs on site, and then the equipment itself is pretty interesting and funky to operate too. So positioning ourselves on the lead for this as a community fits in with our economic development strategy too. If we can be the lead and if we can become a center of excellence for this, then we may become a regional hub, or, you know, the northern part of the province hub, depending on how much we can scale this up. And so the college is very much on board. Our licensees are on board. And I think with Aaron as leadership in this, and Lacey, we're really positioning ourselves on the forefront of where this training regime has to go. So, so questions or comments from council? Okay, seeing none, then I think as we advance this, we've got some political lobbying and others to do, because this is a big ticket item to move into this field at the scale we want to. I think if we are successful, and the indications are there that the province is very interested in this, then I do think that we should do more of a demonstration and really outline for council what it is we're talking about, because it's also a way to communicate to the greater public about how innovative this is. So, final call for any questions or comments. Okay, thank you, Aaron. Very much appreciated, and fingers crossed we can advance this. And there pops back Manager Reid. The floor is yours for the business support team and community marketing update.
Okay, great. The purpose of this report is to provide council with an update of activities of our business support team, including the hotline, our #InQuesnel campaign, and to update council on some planned community marketing tactics that we have coming up once we're able to market Quesnel for travel. So the business support hotline, as you know, started back on April 8th. We had our hotline up and running before the province's Small Business BC hotline was running. And I think before any other communities jumped on board, there have been a few others that have popped up. So we were really happy about that. And we were in partnership with Community Futures and on-phone support from our city staff, Community Futures, the Chamber of Commerce, West Quesnel Business Association, the Downtown Association, and later we also had District of Wells staff as well. So altogether we called 755 businesses. And just to give an idea of where that number comes from, our business license list has just over 1,000 businesses on it. We took out the out-of-town businesses and the multifamily housing units that are required to have business licenses, and we didn't call professional offices like lawyers and accountants because we figured that they probably weren't in need of the direct support. But we called every other business on our business license list and at least left them a message. We connected with 218 businesses that completed an intake form, made 113 referrals, and just about all of those have been followed up now. Since writing this report, an update to that, we're at 147 follow-up connections. So we've called back and checked in with those businesses that we originally provided support to. And of those, I can update that number as well. We're at an average of about $16,415 that those businesses were able to get. Over 70% of them were successful in getting some sort of funding support. And so when we apply that out to the 218, we're at about $3.6 million that was brought into Quesnel in funding support through the COVID-19 programs.
Wow.
About 20% of businesses are looking for some additional support, and they're being referred to Community Futures, and Community Futures has been successful in getting the additional funding from Northern Development that council supported a couple weeks back. And so they will be providing some ongoing support to businesses going forward. And what we found with our call outs now is about 60% of businesses are back open as they were pre-COVID full staffing levels. About 11% are still closed, whether they're mandated to be closed or they're just not ready to open quite yet. And then some are open, but with modified hours or modified staffing levels at this point. So we are just about wrapped up our calls. That should be done by the end of this week. And then our line will continue to route to the Community Futures office for another month for follow-up. And then we'll do a final sort of promotion out that Community Futures support is available ongoing for business. Working with that same team, we've put together a list of local businesses that are providing PPE, and that's been going out and updated every week and circulating on social media. We've had a number of Quesnel businesses participate in the Support Local BC gift card program, so that's been generating some interest. The Chamber's taken the lead on a Shop Quesnel Safely poster campaign, so you might see those posters up in businesses around town, just letting people know how to stay safe and encourage consumer confidence. And then we also had out working with Community Futures in the Chamber, using a thought exchange platform to ask businesses what their biggest challenge is now. And COVID is definitely the thing that's still top of mind for business, but we did have a number of other comments that were not COVID related. So we're just going through those results now, and then we'll have another report for council on our next steps with that. The hashtag in Quesnel program is going well. So this is with funding from NDIT, Community Futures, the Chamber, QDA, WQBA, South Quesnel Business Association, and the CRD, all coming together with a series of Shop Local, Support Local campaigns. So that first one that we did was 28 days of $100 giveaways, and was our best ever engagement on the page with 9,400 engagements and over 1,300 entries for the gift cards. The second campaign highlighted each of our business support organizations with a week-long takeover of the page for each partner organization. Slightly lower engagement when we weren't giving away a $100 gift card every day, but still beating DBC's benchmarks. Coming up next, after we do the Canada Day campaign that Councillor Roodenburg talked about, we'll be going into a series of giveaways to local businesses with 4 staycation themes, and using some video snippets that we were pulling from B-roll of video projects that we've done in the past. So that should really garner some good attention, and will be posted on Love Quesnel and Explore Quesnel. And then in the fall, another series of videos featuring local business owners to be released with reasons to shop local and more chances to win when you support local business. So we're really ramping up what we normally do on the Love Quesnel page. We normally have a pretty small budget, but with everybody coming together and contributing, we're able to do a lot more. So keep an eye out for that. And then on tourism marketing, we're just waiting. Hopefully by the end of this week, we'll be into phase 3, and provincial travel will be encouraged by Dr. Henry. And we're ready to go with a mountain biking video, landing page, and social media campaign that you may see locally, but we'll really be promoting that in other areas and targeting other parts of BC to come to Quesnel and visit. We've got the new trail map out, and I've been hearing from the businesses that have them that they're going out quickly. So we'll be distributing more, and they're at the visitor center as well. We're also now on the Mountain Bike BC website. And we also have a 30-second tourism video that's also ready to go as soon as we can launch it. And as a member of a number of consortiums, including the Explore Caribou, BC Ale Trail, hashtag Ski North BC, and Mountain Bike BC, we'll be getting extra funding from Destination BC to do additional marketing through each of those programs. So Jennifer, our marketing coordinator, is working on the Explore Caribou project, and we'll have those seasonal videos that we completed last year, really ramping up our social media campaigns outside of the region once we can. And that's it for me.
Thank you. And just for council's edification, in part, this was to kind of wrap up before we move into July, the work done with respect to the COVID situation with our businesses. But the other part, this last part, was to give council a heads up that as soon as non-essential travel is allowed, you will see a robust marketing campaign go out. But it's our intention in September or so on, we'll actually bring the videos and the packages and let you actually see some of the really excellent work that's been done in a public forum. So I think it's important that council actually sees some of this product in case you miss it online. Councillor Paul.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Amy, now it's been a while since I checked the online version of the Quesnel travel guide. And the reason I was checking was because I had the paper copy in my hand and I was waiting to see how long it would take for the electronic version to come on board, and it did. But what I'm asking is there going to be, or maybe it's already been done, but an effort to update the electronic version of the guide, because we don't have Billy Barker days, we don't have the rodeo, and on and on and on it goes. And if there's an opportunity to update the online guide so that it is COVID relevant.
No, unfortunately, the online version is really just a online publication of the paper copy, and that contract is managed by the Chamber of Commerce. We do, of course, have the Tourism Quesnel website, and we keep that up to date with what's available now, and as much as possible with what's open and what's closed.
Councillor Paul.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, is there a method whereby when we click in to the online version of the Quesnel travel guide, that there could be a disclaimer that comes right at the beginning that says
so again, Councillor Paul, you've been instructed that is with the Chamber of Commerce. So you should direct those questions to the Chamber of Commerce. Okay. Other questions or comments for council on city business? Okay, Councillor Roodenburg, and then Councillor Rick's good. Okay, Councillor Roodenburg.
Thank you. So I heard several gasps when you said the 2.9 over 3 million when we talk about the amount received by businesses, and that number is still going to carry on because a lot of those programs are extending, and so when you think about it, that's a fair chunk of change coming into our community. And I know that several of the follow-up calls that I made, some of the businesses hadn't even applied to the programs yet because they were busy trying to get themselves set up to be open and doing what they needed to do to make their business successful. Some of them hadn't even had time to apply for these programs. So, that number, I can see, whenever this does end, it's going to be, on the high end of going towards 4. In my mind's eye, just given the comments that we had from the businesses that we talked to. So what Amy said around the fact that we were probably first on the ground with this program. When I talked with my BIA colleagues from across the province, they were all scrambling, trying to figure out what they were doing, and they were really quite interested in what was going on with this. So it's kudos to Amy and to Community Futures and to the Chamber, for getting themselves organized enough to be able to hit the ground running with this for our businesses, because I think it's helped a lot of them be able to maintain. That those programs were never made to make them whole, but they were there to try and get them through, and I think that we've managed to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Roodenburg. Anybody else? Councillor Vic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I wasn't clear there. Short of me jumping up and down. Sorry. I just want to ditto what Councillor Roodenburg is saying, Amy. Certainly the amount is illustrated by the financial assets that have been gained by many businesses in our community. You guys did a phenomenal job. What's also extremely impressive for me is the tremendous coordination between very distinct organizations that have different mandates, all related to economic development, but each has a niche. And I'm so very proud of the work that was able to be done by coordinating a complex exercise with these distinct groups. And I just think it was such a tremendous job. And I know we have saved many businesses in our community by that outreach. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I have to really recognize the partners that we had on this. It was not something that we could have done on our own in our department. I couldn't have done it without having our community development coordinator to help out on the phone line, and we've had to come together before with wildfires and mill closures, but we've never come together so quickly and been able to work together so well, so fast, and just great partnerships.
Thank you. So Amy, I would echo everything that's been said. And I think, you know, the one piece in here was the explicit target at the beginning. The very first conversation we had with all of the partner organizations was to get as much money as was going to be available into our community as a stopgap measure. And I think by any metric, not only the connection with the businesses is comprehensive, but that target of trying to get as much money in as we can is vital. And I think the funding that Community Futures has to continue the dialogue and continue to help people, because we know that many of the programs are now being extended for targeted businesses for another 3 months and so on. So I think the resources will be there to continue to handhold and to help businesses that haven't tapped in yet. So kudos. And I think this is one of those ones that I know that you and your team and Community Futures and others don't always look for recognition, but it is one of those things that I think, to Councillor Roodenburg's point, where the BC Community Development or others with their annual award cycle ought to be considered for some kind of award, because I do think it speaks volumes to who we are as a community and to all the partners that are there. So, okay.
Thank you.
Good, thanks. Good. I'm not seeing any further questions, so you're free to zoom away. Thank you. Okay, Director Bolton. Director Bolton on the license of occupation at landfill.
So the purpose of this report is to receive council's approval of the attached license of occupation with Northern Recycling for a portion of the landfill property. As you all know, our large contract with Northern Recycling ends at the end of June, and we've broken up the various parts of the contract into various parts and put them out to RFPs, etc. But one thing we wanted to have was a proper separate license of occupation for the use of our property. So this just establishes the area they're allowed to use, controls where they're allowed to put their materials, sets out things for liability, indemnity, and potential property taxes, and also a rental fee. So this agreement is just for just under a year, just so it matches the current agreement they have to process all the recycling up at the landfill. But it also has a possibility for extensions, assuming that they continue to do that processing for Green by Nature. So the recommendation is that council approve the license of occupation with Northern Recycling Inc. and authorize the mayor and corporate administrator to sign the agreement.
Can I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Roodenburg so moves. Councillor Paul second. Any opposition or any questions on the recommendation? Okay, I'm not seeing Councillor Vic. Go ahead, Councillor Run.
No question on the recommendation per se, but part of the background on the report is the map on page 8 of 8. And maybe this isn't the right place to discuss this. I'm just wondering, as part of this arrangement, is there extra, and it could be the proponent or the leasee could make this decision, but the recycling area that that's designated on the map, there seems to be some community feedback that perhaps that space is not enough to properly recycle on busy days. Is there flexibility for this space to be broadened a little bit, or is that simply a decision by the leasee?
So sorry, that does not include that area.
Yeah.
That area is actually our recycle depot, and that's still our property. So it's up to us, the city, and working with the CRD to determine how large we make that area. And we've already had a couple discussions about whether we need to pull out the fencing to make a little more space there.
Okay, I apologize. Thank you.
Yeah.
And just as a reminder as well, there will be a fulsome review of flow and space as all part of the work that we're doing on the landfill. So there may be some interim needs, but ultimately we're looking at, zero waste initiatives, materials diversion initiatives, etc. And we've talked about the need that will drive a need to change the entire flow and kind of materials handling at some point too. And again, your issue is a current issue, but there's also a bigger, longer term play as well.
And that's a really good point. I mean, we keep talking about where we're going to end up long-term with that recycling and the eco depot, and we don't want to spend too much money where it currently is, because that's not likely to be the long-term location.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Runge?
Yes, thank you. So my question, and it's really maybe by not being really familiar with it, my question always is, are we getting the best price for our landfill? Is that a fair rental price that we're getting there, or is that, I guess that's my
Actually,
question.
it's an interesting discussion because how many people want to rent part of a landfill, right?
Yeah.
There's not really a market for it, right? So it is similar to a property that we leased that was not far from there for space. So it is comparable to other leases that we have for this type of land. And recognize also that they're serving a lot of functions for us in that location too, right? We have to recognize that they're processing all the recycled materials coming from the door-to-door and the recycle depot. And potentially we may be entering into a contract for commercial cardboard with them, right? So there's a lot of benefits of having them there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think the short answer is it would be almost impossible to do a market valuation or market benchmarking. It's one of those things where what value do we get, and we get a nominal return for them leasing a portion of a landfill to do work that we've contracted them to do. So it's kind of an oddball.
Yeah.
Yeah, my question was more relative to other landfills around the province, like, that have the same similar services, but thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? On the motion, which is the recommendation? Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that has passed. Can I have a motion to receive I guess, what are we doing with that? Well, good. Okay, so the council information package. So in the future now, because we're de facto receiving everything by the adoption of the agenda, then it's up to council members. If you want to pull something out, you need to really do the advance notice to get something pulled and put on the agenda. Councillor Runge.
Yes, thank you. And with that point, that's actually brings up a really good point, because for me, a late agenda item that arrives at 4:10 in the afternoon is just too short for me to actually then give it any detailed read. So I'm not sure if in the past there's a cutoff that if some late agenda item doesn't make it by, let's say, Monday afternoon, that it just moves to the next meeting agenda if it's possible. I understand some things are time sensitive, that they really can't, but if they have the chance, because I think we could have possibly avoided some of the things that happened today if we'd had a cleaner email before.
So the criteria, Councillor Runge, that has always been used is one, the posting of the agenda item. So sometimes the report is not there or available. Second is whether or not an item requires a decision of council that has substantive implications for the city or for council, or that has substantive implications for the budget. Those would never come forward as late agenda items unless there was a clear time sensitivity to them. So sometimes that happens with grants, for example, where we're getting the grant application ready. We get notice on a Thursday or Friday, a grant opportunity is available, and we can't get the actual report to council. And sometimes those ones are tabled with as you come into the council chamber, you'll see it sitting in front of you. Ones that are non-decision of council, that are just sort of in due course business, like the two that came late tonight, they just generally will go if they're published on the agenda, because there's no requirement for council, no budget implications, no city implications, and no decision of council. We just want to move expeditiously with it. So that's kind of the criteria we use to determine whether something needs to be bumped to a future council meeting. But Councillor Roodenburg wanted to make a statement.
Well, and I do apologize for the fact that the executive committee came today. It was done last week and was sent out, but somewhere it got lost in the cyber world, and it was kind of like, oh, did I miss the report when I spoke with one of our staff members here, and it was kind of like it didn't show up. So for whatever happened there, I'll take responsibility for it. The report was done last week, but it just got lost. So, piggybacking on the mayor's comments, there really wasn't anything in there that needed to have any major decisions. So I didn't feel bad that it was coming through today. And it is our last meeting of the year, so I wanted to get it done and over with.
And sorry, go ahead, Councillor Runge.
Yeah, it was because in this case, it actually went to the city manager's report that came to us today, because it did refer to some things that our council, actually the new council, was in, and I would have just had some questions with regards to some of those things, but that's okay. It's passed now. If at all possible, if we could have a little bit more lead time is my request. Yeah. Thank you.
So Councillor Runge, I want to state as explicitly as I can, we always take that into consideration on any decision matters, time-sensitive matters, or budget matters. The intention of the city manager's report in this case was not a discussion item either, and it wasn't a debate item. It was simply a statement of record, and that's how they've been treated in the past. I don't believe we've ever had a councillor respond in the manner that we've had tonight to a statement of a correction of the record. It's just simply a report that says, this is what the councillor said, this is what actually happened, and it's done. Okay, so in the future, that, you know, if we have to do that again, that's the way that they're generally treated. Anyway, we're off topic. You'll have to deal with this.
Thank you.
As another item. You can speak to the city manager or myself with respect to agenda. The question that you posed, we make every effort to make sure any substantive business you have in your package on the Thursday or Friday when we post the agenda. Okay? That's our standard practice.
Thank you.
Okay, with that then, moving on. So that was in respect to SIP. So nobody's got anything around SIP. We have no correspondence, no bylaws, no new business. Changes to upcoming meeting schedule, none, although we've now got notice of a strategic planning session going to be booked in September. No changes to committee appointments. Just a quick heads up on announcement future events from me. The community forest discussion that we had to stand down because of COVID, we will be having tomorrow. It's just a business meeting of all of the individuals, all of the organizations that have been invited to potentially participate in the community forest. So that'll be our first kind of post-COVID actual in-person meeting. But in order to have it, we're using the second arena. And we've told everybody to come, if they don't have big voices, to bring megaphones, because it might be a bit awkward as having a dialogue in there. So any other announcements, future events? I have Councillor Roodenburg, Councillor Goulet.
So just in regards to the JPC strat planning, one of the things that we said to the CRD, that if there are any agenda items you want to see on strat planning, please forward them to us ahead of time so that we can, as co-chairs, decide whether it needs to go on and whether we need any kind of staff report. So that, sorry, just to cut, I should have included that in my little blurb there, so that we don't bring something up that we have no paperwork for.
Yeah, Councillor Goulet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just quickly, these are things that have taken place already, but I think can be put as celebrations. And the first I'm going to use is National Indigenous Day on the 21st, which ended up trending quite a bit, actually. And there was a hashtag on there for people should start to donate to organizations and that put on National Indigenous Day. And I just wanted to congratulate, because we did receive some from the community here for the Telecom Society put on the event. And I just wanted to put that out there, that was totally unexpected. It somehow just trended as a national thing. And I just wanted to say thanks to the community in this time, and some businesses donated some funds. And I thought that was really cool to show support for the National Indigenous Day in a different format. The other, if I may, is also a celebration to recognize the grads of 2020. There was many graduation ceremonies that are taking place yesterday, today, and tomorrow, celebrating those grads and showcasing and just congratulating them. I know it's a different type of a grad, but I think it's a recognition for them that they they've done their 13 years, and I just wanted to shoot out and say congratulations to the grads of 2020.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Any other announcements, future events? Councillor Vic?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to announce that since February of this year, the Quesnel Lions have been unable to host their monthly garage sale, which is a very popular event and an excellent fundraiser for that organization, for which they use those funds to do many important community projects and help individuals. Anyway, I'd like to report that as this Saturday, June 27th, they're going to be resuming their first sale since those stopped in February. Of course, following all recommendations from WorkSafe BC regarding distancing and capacity and things like that. So I'd invite the community to responsibly come and enjoy the garage sale and find some good deals this Saturday. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Seeing no further hands up or mouths open or people jumping up and down, I would invite a motion to adjourn.
Question period.
Oh, question period, if for those press that are still with us. I'm seeing nothing unmuting. Okay, so a motion to adjourn. Councillor Runge, Councillor Vic, anyone opposed? Thank you, everybody.